I fell in love with ships, listening to my dad's stories about World War II on his aircraft carrier and I at the theater. And he had probably a wooden model battleships and a freighter, which I'm afraid my brother and I destroyed as we played with them. But so on a trip, I'm glad to say, on a trip to East Coast, my first ship to do work was the USS North Carolina, known as the showboat and most decorated ship in World War II. It had 12 battle stars, 12 engagements where it fired a lot of arms. I first found out about North Dakota on a trip to the Air Center. About 1981 or so, I'm looking for a bathroom off the old entrance, and I look over the ledge along that hallway, and there was this giant ship in a big glass box in the basement. So I found my way down, and there was a naval model of the USS North Dakota. It's 11 feet long, and it's just a gorgeous model. It's very hard to take a picture of. It's above glass. Also down in the basement area was the silver set for the ship we use and for all these organizations, which I'll talk about later. And also the boat plate, what used to be called the figurehead of the North Dakota, is sitting outside the big window on the roof in the grass. And it's about, I think it's about this house, about that wide. So my time name page, it's got the important dates there in the ship's life. So 1907 would be when they laid the keel. 1908 was when it was launched, and 1910 is when it was commissioned into the U.S. Navy. 1923, I'm afraid, it was decommissioned, stranded on the list. 1924, they decided it should be a target ship. So it was reclassified. But unfortunately, it was never given a number, so it was never used as a target ship. And it was finally sold in 1931 and broken up into scrap. The battleship that never fired up shot an end around being that off. But as I researched this ship for the last 30 years or so, I came to realize that it had never been in a battle of any kind. Not even the small arms, not even the Marines, not even the fighting jets, or other jets. There was only order to go to a incident in Mexico where it could have engaged the fleet and it arrived 4 days late. So other people call it the ship that trained so many sailors. But it kind of goes in that name of, the nickname of the ship that couldn't die, the ship that couldn't sink, the ship that didn't make it to the Boston Tea Party. Was on the one of the Irvies. And I think the ship that sank twice, another ship had that name. So obviously I'm trying to picture a huge giant warehouse building filled with cables, hundreds of drafts and drawing up blueprints, no computers, no copy machines, all the mechanical arms drawing up pictures. So a profile up there, what it looks like. It was about 517 feet long, 85 feet across, about a 30-foot draft or 30 feet in the water. That's 3 stories in the water. Weighed 22,000 tons, water displacers, fully armed and loaded. I put this one in because it shows the number 3 gun turret tower. The main reason for these ships was a floating, maneuverable artillery system. So that's this, and this was unique because it had 5 turrets with 2 guns each. First US-made ship of its kind. So that is the gun housing the turret that rotates, which was invented when they put one on the USS Monitor in the Civil War, the first rotating turret. It shows an elevation of about 50 degrees, 5 degrees down in case something was trying to attack from water. You wouldn't use a 12-inch shell, not torpedo boat. Okay, it's 5 stories tall. So at the very base is where all the powder and all the ammunition is stored. Electric motors, everything was electric motors. And they use conveyor systems. This is a conveyor system right here to bring shells up and load the guns. Over here is a cross section of the hull. The funny thing is, these were, steam ships, the first ones were wood powered, then coal. Well, they used the coal, these roll bunders along the sides of the ship next to the hull. That helped keep the ship from sinking through torpedo heads. Submarines and torpedoes in the early 1900s were big deals, and many ships, North Dakota did not, had swinging up booms with giant chain mail nets that were supposed to help prevent torpedoes from actually hitting the ship. They explode before they hit the hull. So that's a whole area right here. This whole, got a use of this mount along there. So right away, there's controversy. The appropriations bill that Congress signed and delivered for the $20 million to build 2 ships came out in 1906. And that's what we started doing, the whole blueprints, everything, the new design. Here, the Delaware, number 28 was named, and number 29 was going to be North Dakota or maybe Utah. Well, this got somehow leaked, spread around. The New York State legislature started pressuring the Secretary of the Navy because it was going to be the world's biggest, newest, fastest, most powerful battleship ever built, and should be aimed New York because it's the greatest state in the Union. And that was their brainy brains. Well, I say North Dakota zeros up there because we didn't never had a ship named after our state. We were only about 16 years old, I think. New York only had 4. Plus, they only had an armored cruiser sailing in the seas named New York. The story goes on for 7 pages. And this was printed in 1996. They did this research and found out that even the definitive story of the USS North Dakota by, you gotta read this one, Colonel Gilbert F. Rundell, is published in the North Dakota History Magazine, 1967. That was my 10-page story. He never mentioned anything about this in Charles. So these guys in 1996, these 2 authors in the quarterly, did this research, and they found out that Senator Hanna, if I remember right, Hanborough, sure Mike probably remembers him, NBC Hanborough, got word that this was happening. So he did our legislature. Everything was going on back and forth, been on for months. He finally got a visit. He was able to visit President Theodore Roosevelt and explain the case to him. Well, President Roosevelt did intervene, and the idea was the greatest. So we, instead of big, and New York, the best state in the country, the biggest population, the most commerce, all this stuff, we were the greatest agricultural state. And so the big thing that we convinced President Roosevelt was that all states are equal no matter their population, that Congress, how much money they have. So it was named the North Dakota. So there's 2 ships in class. The first ship is the Delaware, the Delaware-class. So it was built in Fore River Shipyard in Quincy, Massachusetts, which is a private contractor. Cost of $10 million. And this is where they build the ship into slipway. Now the structure, these mechanisms up here is where all the cranes go back and forth like tracks. And they're hauling all the heavy, 22,000 tons of steel, pretty much, plates, everything in place. And then of course the rear is over in this area, and it'll eventually be launched. When I look at this and other pictures that I found, it was never enclosed. This is in Massachusetts. I think they have winter there. Things freeze, it rains, it snows. So these 4 shipyard workers, they really had to task a handle. So that first big day is the keel laying. There's There's a keel plate right here. And along the bottom, they're laying down plates, and then they start laying the ribs. Everything This is 1907. Everything is put together with high rivets. Imagine old movies with the big riveting air pressure gun, your van, and other guys at the other side of the plate, and he's holding a giant hammer like they push it against the other end of the rivet. Welding had not been invented yet. They will work on it, but the first all-steel welded ship with no rivets was about 1930. So, and then they had a sort of small shipyard ceremony for the teal weighing. Now this is showing some progress. There's more of the ribs starting up, and then these will attach. So that way car ribs, they hold the structure there, and they actually get to be called commendate on their nose frames. So the one at the bow is frame number one. Then you go back to the other end, you can have 50 of them, usually 4 to 6 feet apart. Well, of course, across those are for bulkheads. And the next rise up and down. To every one of those rooms, every one of those frames, left, right, up, down, all gets a code. So when you become a sailor, you can't find your place on the ship. You better know your codes, you figure out where you're at. Also, it tells you where the machinery is if you have to work on a machine or go to your post. So, big deal. It was newspaper stories about our ship all across the country. It's going to be the biggest, most expensive machine ever built, the most powerful warship ever built. They didn't have great, they didn't have any photographs. It had been built, and that's just coming up from from the ground. So a lot of fanciful artists' pictures, interpretations of what the ship was going to look like. So, and these are newspaper stories everywhere about this. So it's getting close to launch day. Now, when you think of a ship being launched, it hits the water, it's ready to go. But no, it's the hull. It's totally enclosed hull, the main deck, the rubber decks, everything's in place. Now, one night talked about a figurehead bull plate at Bismarck, and that's where it is. Well, here's I inserted this. This is a closer picture of it, and this I have. Some people call it a shield. It's marked heraldic or like a coat of arms type thing. And it's a carryover from the guard wood figureheads of the sailing shoe days. And it's you can hold the window or you can log around the grounds in this marking and go and touch it. And it's, like I said, pretty huge. So it's launched, slipping into the water. Miss Mary Benton, daughter of retired Colonel John Medden of Bismarck, and he was at Bismarck because he worked for Governor Hurt. He was on the staff. So she wrote the bottle of wine on the bow. Young socialite. I mentioned the launching chains. So we have the anchor chains are up here, and they have launching chains. So they just don't want to slide away or go down rear right cells. So it's anchored in a way. This is part of what's known as incomplete. They're called torpedo blisters, are added to the ship when it's being fitted out. And that gives room for the torpedoes, if they were to explode, to not go through the inner hull. So it's the same thing here, and it's more expensive. And so far before on full page, everything about our newest ship. It's quite a 20 story about a much better interpretation of what the ship looks like. Although it does have a white hull, it's painted white. That's a carryover from Teddy Roosevelt's days of the great white fleet of the United States circumnavigating the earth. All the ships were painted white. So it's a pretty close interpretation. So after it's launched, it ends up at the fitting yard, and they have cranes. All the equipment comes over, all the machinery, everything is added on the ship. And it still has the bulk plate there you can never see it. that is part of a gun. My reason for it should be built. A 12-inch 45 caliber. Shells are 12 inches for us, about this tall. They're just a big chunk of metal, but they're fully explosive. They have a tempo. It's like a fuse, but it collides and explodes, weighs 870 pounds. The powder is installed separately after the bullet is put into the breech. Through a timing it, they're sealed because a special kind of powder called black powder, it's cordite, is the name of it. That gun weighs 52 tons. 25 caliber means it's 45 feet long. But that's just a barrel. The fat part that they're hooked to, that is a breech where the actual powder explodes and forces through. It's a giant rifle because the barrel was rifled, just like an anti-rifle. So that's where the bullet and powder goes in. The shell goes in. Missed on the North Dakota. So I think that guy, I guess guys were, even my dad's uniforms from World War II, they were even small. I didn't wear them after he got out of high school. They were too small. He got bigger, of course. But that's pretty thunderbolt. This is the mechanism. It's a 15-degree step screw breech locking mechanism. So this could actually swing in, and you can see how there's kind of these notches. Swings in place. It rotates and it locks all the screws, and it's ready to fire. So they fire it, breech opens up, compressed air blows everything. So there's no dry embers because unfortunately a few of those guns exploded because there was an ember still in the chamber when they put in the bullet and powder and the breech wasn't sealed. Very tragic. A gun turret with two guns like that took about 30 men just to run up the guns. Burnt. From the turret all the way to the bottom. It was unique in the fact that first U.S. ship to use a steam-powered turbine engine. Now, I have laying on the table, you can see it afterwards, the HMS Dreadnought. Built and launched in 1906 with an English ship. You were actually competing with the English, the Japanese, and Russians, French and Germans in the battleship race, the Grey Horse race. And the Dreadnought was all big guns, and so its name became a name to the new class of ships, so each from North Dakota was called the American Dreadnought. But it had turbine engines. So the Delaware was built with piston engines, because they could still really can pull it and the mileage. But this one with steam power with turbines. And you were beat back LDE in America called hers. The turbine system was invented by Mr. Farson in Denmark. And he had pulls and meal accomplishment. So that's being fitted with two below. So it only had two propellers. Direct drive. Well, the drive should come from one on the side of the ship. They actually looked directly to the turbine. It had clutch, but it had no gearbox. So they had to have a third smaller turbine for reverse. There's 14 of these 5-inch guns, 50 calibers. So 50 outside can be some pretty long barrel. They were hand-loaded one at a time, but they had a brass casing, about a 60-pound bullet. And they could shoot 19 miles when they were tipped out like this. But you're not that hurt. You just kind of do a barrage. There were two at the launcher on the very front of the ship. One's called sponsons that's on the side wall. And they were always so wet and everything. Then at first time back and dry after on the shipyard, they took those off. They sealed over the side, all up by the acres. Oh, finally, we get back to New York. Look at this artist's rendition. The great American battleship in the street, Navy Park Avenue in BRC. I just noticed this morning when I was reviewing that North Dakota is not in the headline. They don't want to mention us as Dave. I didn't think it was public knowledge that we took their name away. But this was an interesting thing. Union Square in New York City. The USS Recruit, a totally wooden-built training ship on land in the heart of New York City. They end up training 25,000 sailors in 3 years, 1917, 18, and 19. They get their practice moving between decks, fave guns, this and that, and everything for the fresh, they're almost like boot camp. So that was pretty. So they did bit there in New York. So that was shit. American battleships have a very unique design, which you saw in the very first image and on the North Dakota drive by. The observation decks, or towers, are made out of 48 steel hollow tubes that are rotated oppositely 90 degrees to make a hyper-parabolic structure. Only American ships use these, and a few ships built in America for some foreign countries. So they were called cage mast or lattice mast, sometimes, chicken mast. Well, the reason being they were very light. The wing went right through them. Wasn't it probably meant that such a tight roll at sea. And a shell could go through too, as was proved a few years later in a couple of incidents. The shells actually right through and the mast did not topple. So the reason for the 90 feet above water? Well, the Brooklyn Navy Yard, the New York Navy Yard, or some of it back and forth, and many airships did, had 90 feet currents to the bottom of the Brooklyn Bridge. So they had to clear that shit. So there's some pretty nice pictures on land. Great ships. Ships going on under Brooklyn Bridge, and the bridge is just lying for you to watch it. It is a big view. So I guess my duty is to climb to the top with my wind binoculars and look for other ships, because there was no radar. We didn't have airplanes. How do you tell there's a ship over the horizon? So they had down, spotlight the decks on there, and there's a reinforcing reeds. You could kind of see how these are every 4 feet, I believe. Rounding the edges way up. Different areas there. Knobbed out at the base of those two towers that are on our ship is the signal deck. And of course, this is 1908, 1909. I think Marconi invented a radio, but it wasn't getting very far yet. So everything was not in visual line of sight, and the fleets were communicating hand up. Signalmen, self-bore flags, different types of sighting. I think this is a tower compass right here. And that's our 6 bell, which is also in Bismarck. That's on display down this way area. They were inventing radio telephones. I think they were short range, and then of course you had telephones in the ship, but you also had just like in Titanic, weird yelling in a pipe, and your voice is going down below, to the engine room or something to change speeds through a voice pipe. So being one of the radio ships that were built, a lot of press had to go out. So great photographs. The postcards for newspaper stories, for dignitaries, politicians, for their offices, this and that. I want to know, how long did it take for everybody to get into place? They're all wearing whites, a dirty, coal-fired battleship. They got a clean constantly in salt water. All the way, you can't even see the top of where the crow's nest is up there, Another thing that a lot of people probably don't understand, these are cambions. They're plugged the barrel. And another freely used word, Mundiferous sex, also has those in there, nomenclature. So that's kind of variance on how many, depending on the wartime situation, how many men were actually listed on board. And pretty much always 55 officers. Captain Charles, I believe it was Charles Plunkett, was the first captain commander. There were 10 total captains over its lifetime. And also, I have been trying to find any names of crew members. I found about 5. And there is a website that's unofficial Navy website where you can put down your descent ancestors' name, he served on, and before you entered his name on our website, and there's 1 name for the 2 years. I haven't had much time to do a Bismarck and actually get in the archives, right? A real history person would have, and do the research. So once it gets pretty much trimmed out and ready to go, it's time for shakedowns and loses. Like testing on your new car, you use what? Second half from somebody? So you gotta go out, because a 10-mile course, you have to go at different speeds, different maneuvers. You're testing equipment, you're seeing how you're bent, you're retrained, how they work, how they do their jobs. It's supposed to, be the world's fastest battleship too. And the turbine engines were supposed to make it super smooth, so guns could be really accurate. Well, the first time they tried to see my blows apart. Luckily, nobody was killed. And so they had to come back in the curve, and backhand again. So it does reach 22.6 knots per hour, about 24 miles an hour. Now, that became the new standard speed for this generation of battleships. In World War II, when after a circuitry limitations or your ability and setting up new ships, those were called fast battleships. And they did 28 to 32 knots off, which is really hers. But the thing is, you have to pass all these tests, then you can be accepted by a USB. So if you don't pass the test, everybody will be wasted. I mean, the company that builds it still gets the money, but it might not become the ship. It might get sold to a different country. But that did not happen. The Delaware was commissioned first, and then the Barcelona a little bit later. So these are the first American dreadnoughts, as they were called, because of the British era. A very similar design, if almost look at the nil. It's hard to tell them apart, plus actually it's titled that way in the image. Well, but that fall, Warren Latson rough 80 ships were dangerous. Many began to consider dangerous. These 2 ships were the first 2 in U.S. Navy history to use coal and try to use oil. They wanted to convert to oil. So at boiler line, that squirting into one of the boilers, feeding oil into the boiler, we were testing how this would work. Rupture, oil sprayed out, got fired, went into the tank, fuels blew up, exploded, killed 3 men. They had to flood the entire boiler room. The engines had to be shut down. If they wouldn't have flooded the boiler room, the ship could have exploded. The stove close to one of the major magazines, there were 3 turns that I showed in that initial drawing, and had giant steam lines and then powder all around it. It could have blown the whole shit off. So it actually was towed back to the shipyard. This is something you always hear about this too, so these men always heard the yellow honor for life saving. But unfortunately, on November from Arcoa, the ones that were killed or were in the mill. Then I heard I didn't realize, I always thought you had to be in combat to get the Medal of Honor. But no, back to World War II, you could get the Medal of Honor for life-saving effort, or doing something courageous while it's not a combat action. So it was changed in World War II. Apparently they thought there was too many people getting medals of honor. There was a couple of colonels or something that got in for a push of paper across the desk. They were to refer to the battle, Veracruz incident or the Spanish-American War too. So having the problems. When you harden the steel, the surface treated and everything like that, you have to follow certain temperatures. If you add so much carbon gas or carbon dioxide, this thing make the layer, the metal much stronger. And it started flaking off the side of the ships where the armor was. So I had to go back to the dreadnought, to the shipyard, and add replace the armor. Bethlehem Steel have divided all the armor, and because of these shipbuilding efforts, when we moved from cast iron to steel, alloys, different armors, it really built up our steel industry, and that's how we became so famous. There were great steel companies who got steel over the years. Well, the crew had to do something besides to dry it and sear it, so putting the groceries away, get everything on the whole deck. Oh, what a job. 1,000 people on there, usually, at sea, getting supplies from ships or the shipyard. We're away down, I don't think they had an elevator anywhere. A step after step. If you ever want, if you see them show and have to walk up and down the steps, you want to right or wrong. It's very good. Okay, pie duty for 1,000 sailors. How many pies do you make? Just no air conditioning. It shouldn't have been air conditioning. It wasn't advanced enough. Of course, you had great fans, you had ventilation chassis. You know, we saying to cool somewhat, but to make mud pies. Famous ship like ours, people want to visit it, the dignitaries, world leaders. Admiral Tobo, who was in charge of the fleet in World War II, came to visit in 1912. So we had everybody in our dress waist. I'm sure there's quite a few politicians there. State Department, I'm sure, is there. Going around, get to where the whole ship. But apparently, because of this visit and our friendship with the Japanese people, 1 year later, all the cherry blossom trees were delivered to Washington, D.C. and Toronto. And that's where they came from, the Scorville business. Gunnery practice. When the crew started out, they said they had a 20% accuracy, which is horrible. Well, what are they shooting at? We're shooting at giant barges with these huge targets on them, 30 by 30 feet to rear, towed behind, with a long line behind another small boat and stuff like that. And actually had to shoot miles away, as far as they could see off those observation towers, and shoot those clubbage guns. Now, just like our steam locomotives that were coal-fired, that's why you have gooey for smoke. And of course, black colors, so you got black smoke when you fire, unlike smokeless powder and wire arms and rifles. It doesn't leave a black fog when you shoot your rifle at a deer. The common misconception is that when they fire all these guns, that 10 guns shooting broadside away from the ship, the whole ship moves over from the recoil. But that's not true. It looks like that in some pictures, especially in World War II battleships. But it's just a matter of weight of the ship. So it's been proved that it can't say it doesn't after. If that were not happy to throw off the next round shots, it would be very difficult. So sometimes it's pretty hot up there. Caribbean Sea, they only travel all over the Atlantic, Caribbean. So the men can bring their rugs up, sleep on the deck. A lot of times in the native pictures you'll see canopies. Sometimes these canvas canopies covered with entire started the ship. Nice view of the ventilators, the big air ducts, for the air down to the boiler rooms, bazooka barges, all that stuff. So coaling was probably, I think, the dirtiest job next to shoveling coal into a boiler. Then we went on to the deck of the ship from an adjoining ship called Collier that carried only coal, or in the shipyard, you could do the same thing. So the coal bunkers were along the starboard of the bow, one inside along the side decks.
Right? We got go back.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah. But those four things there are at ventilators.
Those are those air ventilators, almost.
Those parallel things there are a track or some kind. The little.
Oh, great.
Go.
Those are the 12-inch downs.
Sorry.
Those are the big gun barrels on the turrets.
Okay.
The ship was a little bit unique. They did 4 ships. The North Dakota, the Delaware, the Utah, and the Florida had 5 turrets, where the last 2 turrets were back to back. So they actually could only, this one can rotate 90 or 180, shoot to the rear. This one could go either way, but it couldn't shoot to the rear or the front. And then this one could shoot, side to side and back. They changed that design and came off. The front turns are different because they're called super firing. The second turn is higher than the front one. So they changed that design. So they were all super firing. So all guns can fire at the same time. They all stand direction.
The coal would be effect.
I think so. It's part of the cleanest burning. That's the least nice ash. Yeah. Yeah. So the coal bunkers, as I said, are along the sides of the ship to protect from corrivals, and alongside the boiler rooms where you had to shovel the fire to the wires. The thing about manholes tower on the street about this big, 24 inches of grass, they pop those covers and then you start showing tons and tons and tons of coal I had down into those bunkers until the deck is going to be cleaned and scrubbed again. Probably, I think, one of the dirtiest. Well, a lot of companies helped build this ship, so a lot of them use tanks, put on amortizers and different business magazines, things like that. So the non-parallel cork company was very drawn. They insulated the North Dakota Alfred cork tracks. It's just amazing. I don't think the asbestos, well, back then they didn't know the asbestos companies. Hundreds of tons of asbestos were used in each ship, insulating, fireproofing purposes, things like that. So that was one of the big dilemmas of extracting these ships, was reading the asbestos out, but we didn't know how bad it was back then. So, well, we have a gray ox. Pretty amazing. I've never seen a ship and drive up in person, but it must be incredible. You could walk underneath it. Reason being, you have to come in, you have to scrape all that lead paint off the hull, all those that's rope, everything, and then you do a color wear against the hole so you can hit that. And it's not welded, it's probably odd rivet in that in place, and it's repainted with more black and red lead paint by hand. So behind the scaffolding and on the sides, you can see the men along there. Hanging off the scaffolding. And there's one that screws, or as they're called, propellers, one on each side, and all string. That holds in place. So the ship trained, I would guess, 2,000 sailors at least, up through the ranks, 10 different captains, off the East Coast, Caribbean islands, over his lifetime. There's a YouTube channel where the fellow, that's another battleship enthusiast, he has a whole lap over his shoulder, he calls it the ship that trained. That's another good name for it. I like to say that it is where shot hangar because we are, where I grew up, we're the Peace Garden City. So I always have to tell for it. Well, you could go in the Caribbean, you could get shore beef, but there was something else happening at this time in this ship's life, and was how prohibition. But these other countries, you didn't have prohibition. So these Spaniards always warned the laws of a barman apply to you no matter what other country you're in. Well, at this time is when 1914 is when the Mexican Revolution happened, and it became called the Veracruz incident as far as the West Navy was concerned. The Marines were sent. They captured the revolutionaries, they captured the embassy, they had hostages, all those things went on. So USS North Dakota was ordered there. Part of the other smaller ship from Fleet Band on they arrived, but they never fired any shots. They did, Breams on land did, and so I did ride 4 days late. I thought this was nice, and they're all with attention, they're very distressed whites, and it's a great shot, we're in the barrels. Look, I don't know when big Terriers coming in or what the beast before. Could be just captain's inspection. One of the cruises that we went on, kind of put together by the ship, 11,000 miles, all going to the Mediterranean, ports of call. Just amazing. So there's various postcards. The postcards are a big deal with every battleship. You get a lot of men shot and send it over on the sandwich. So all kinds of different ways of the Maze. How far they went. One of the more famous pictures, Berntroy is in Grand Malta. And the train, and behind it books is one of the largest English battleships. You know, they were our allies, but not really, still before World War I. But we competed with them in ship design and everything, so they were side by side. One of the postcards. North was, because it's an older ship, by this time, there'd already been 4 more ships built. Each one more advanced. So the North Dakota was not the world's greatest, mightiest battleship before. I think it's probably right back in here, Delaware and they did get sent through the Panama Canal. I found one picture of it in the Panama Canal Lake, and I thought I couldn't find it. It took me a year to find any written reference to why did it go through the Panama Canal. And then I found out like 2 days ago, we went to twice, 2 different years. Well, it turned out that we were thinking about Pacific Ocean and Pearl Harbor, Hawaii, and so they had Pacific Fleet about 4 ships. So we sent it through the canal for usual fleet exercises, run training exercises. And so this is a famous vantage point for getting pictures of ships I read about going through the Panama Canal. Kind of strange, I was noticing that a lot of these later pictures, these Madison masts they look painted black, but I'm guessing it's because they're covered in soot from the hull. Then the broadside down there, pictured the tower of another battleship. Full broadside, all 10 guns at one time. That's just amazing. No way to be on the deck. You'd be blown out the deck off your sheets, you'd go death. The war had to be incredible. Well, after most of the exercises, they were already put through, so they did manage to cross the equator once. So all the body waters had to go through the ceremony to get their seaways. So Captain Neptune's there, and it's one heck of an initiation. My father had to go to read, told me about it. That was something else. You got covered in grease, you had to jump off the ship. There's all kinds of minor knowledge. Hazing type thing. So 6 months before the end of her game, I think really good and nice swallow when I talked to her. Yeah. Another thing, of course, they all had lifeboats and not healthy. So these are the grains used for all these supplies and also optimal lifeboats. There are some images of them participating in exercises where they're just starting to use airplanes. Float planes are coming around, flying all out of street. And obviously, because they were airplanes and now radio was coming along, you could fly an airplane, you could see the next battleship over the right, in case you need to shoot that direction. So, newspaper articles, what are we going to do with it? You know, well, a big thing happened. Washington Deal Treaty, they decided, all great powers decided, whoa, we're spending too much money. We're really giving battleships. Who can't afford it? We got to stop. You got to slow down. They tried it in 1907 in the Netherlands, and it didn't happen. No way to sign it. And those Koreans saw it, they just didn't have ship out. Now we had enough ships. So should you scrap it or pirate ship? There's been a few covered ships before where they actually shoot at the ship, not the barge or the tower. So then this email decommission. And this is what you do. Now I have my own torch cutting set I've used for many, many years since I worked for Woolweefy, the juncture. That would take hours to cut that barrel off. I mean, I can't believe it. I guess he's got, his boots might be, improper spark proof. You ever had a hot piece of metal fall down in your sock when you're cutting the torch? It's not even thing. So that's what happened. It was decommissioned. They pretty much kind of taken away from that, all right. So they decided a year later it could become a target ship. Barrels, so they removed all the barrels, all the small guns are gone. Barrels are gone. Well, this guy was pretty smart. He actually came up with radio control mechanisms to power the boilers, to steer the ship, and to make it sail through the water. And the other ship could be 10 miles away, just at the horizon line. But and so they were always classified as a 9X-6-4-10. It never got longer. It was going to be set to off the coast of New Hampshire for a target exercise, and these got canceled. So it never became an official target ship. It's not listed in any of the records, except for a little bit, be almost there as a target ship. So 1923 is when they was both supposed to be scrapped, but the Delaware was. So this is dry docking, the giant crane and everything is removing the smokestacks, the observation towers. Of course, they still had some guns then. They didn't have to cut up all the guns. They could keep some. So it was scrapped. And that's the worst thing ever to do, push it, just cut it up to scrap. That's much what they did that long short. It's just a slow death of what it wants to do. So everything has to be cut first. You could unbolt the date of it, but a lot of it had to be cut. Just cut right down the lot. All the way. Just think of all the toxins all the way out, sludge, gold dust, all that crap. So you had to watch out and make sure you didn't have an explosion or cutting torch and old coal bin or dust and fumes. So we get to the present day. That's the ship on 11 feet long, official U.S. Navy on loan to the Harris in the North Dakota. Very 100% accurate. In fact, it was at the shipyard, so the guys working on the ship, Billy, you can look at. This is where it goes, kind of thing. A week ago, I found a newspaper story. I did not know this. Grand Forks County Fair, safer in Grand Forks. Let's bring the battleship to North Dakota. So, the senator convinced the Navy Department to loan us for an indeterminate time this ship model. Steel boxcar, totally secure, totally insulated, totally securitized, on a special train all the way to North Dakota from Fall River, Massachusetts, and went on its way in Grand Forks. I suppose that county fair runs up there. But I do not know if it went back to the East Coast. Did it stay here, and that's why it's sitting in Denmark still? Came from Grand Forks, he decided to loan it to us and started sending it back, I'm not sure. Then I noticed over here, USS Maine, and her being raised from the dead. Of course, Rob Bremen, Maine, True story. Still not proven if it was sunk by the Spanish or an internal magazine gunpowder explosion. The 4 investigations, all of them cannot definitively say what happened. So that's an area judge, and of course they built a huge coffer dam system around it. They pumped all the water out of it. They freed it from the mud. They cut off the boat up front half, put a bulkhead in it, tow it 10 miles out of there to 3-mile deep water. Yeah, sunk it Canacero. So it's salting the Caribbean right off the land. Part of the display in Bismarck, if you ever get there, is worth seeing. There's the ball plate outside on the grass for ship to Bell. And a lot of new terminology, signs, pictures. There's a lot of papers and yarn there too, which I did manage to visit and want to get some get the photograph on the card platform. The silver set. They did a fundraiser in 1909, 1910. They raised $18,000 from school kids who gave for the silver set. It's embellished with all the motifs of Mort's Club bison, wheat, barley, coal, all those great things. It serves 40 people. And the committee paid, on their own, they paid for, there's a 9-member committee, they paid for 9 more cups. They had their names engraved on. They did find a picture of 3 women using it at an event at Capitol. I didn't say what year, but they reported punch on the punch roll. And one of those tea cups has been donated by the family back to the Air Center. So they even have one of those in the house. It's kind of this way where the silver set is, looking on the window, a big picture in North Dakota up there. My hope, I think it will happen, is that if we finish the new Veterans Wing at Air Center, all of this will be moved into a very bigger, more prominent area on ground floor of the new wing. Back in 2000, I just learned how to use Photoshop 2. Like the first version on a Mac 2B computer with a square mouse. I was in Bismarck, so I went to the Bismarck-Mandan Bridge, and I took this picture looking toward the railroad bridge, I believe. Bismarck's on that side, Mandan, and I see Postard. Instead of scrapping the ship, why couldn't we have bought it from the Navy for $870,000? The scrappy company paid. Towed it all the way up to Mississippi, to Missouri. There was no Garrison Dam. We had to worry about it. Well, you take the tower thought, you like when the house did top, right? So Greens, North Dakota, come scare a battleship on Battleship That Never Fired, whatever, Battleship Drive. Well, we've had how many other great museum ships that we moved to? Massachusetts, Alabama, Iowa, Wisconsin, Texas. They're all over the place. I've done 3 aircraft carriers. I've had my dad on 2 of them. The Yorktown, the Nimitz, and the Midway also. All around the country. And there's cruisers, there's submarines. People would always say, don't ask anybody on the tree because they don't know. Go to the Chamber of Commerce and the Business Bureau, ask them, where's the museum? I see it. I want to love tour. When I was in New Jersey or Philadelphia, I had to wait for an airplane to take off at 3 o'clock. So 9 o'clock in the morning, I went over the bridge, the cab, the canyon. I got on the USS New Jersey, 15 battle stars, most awarded to any ship in the USD, because it served in Vietnam also. I have a long history. 9 o'clock, I'm ready for my tour. One man's out there. Are you here for the tour? I said, yeah, I'm here, but I got to go on a plane flight about 3 o'clock. He says, well, come on, you're it. He toured me through the entire ship. I was the only guy. He had served Bellamy Jews. We went through the mess, the galley area. Beautiful spread of food, cupcakes, everything was put out. And for the rear admiral, we can't touch him, man. He's coming to visit today. So, that was something else. So this is what I call the bureau wall, the Veterans Park. Over by Menard, this is our station. Short bio, you'll need all that stuff in that Veterans Park, your wild website, parks.org. You could read all the bios, see all the before and after pictures. Oh, I had the triple up and we get them on the stone wall. Believe it or not, there's a Minecraft digital label battleship works. Now it doesn't sail, but there's a guy who put it out there. I'm trying to get my 10-year-old grandson. What are you doing about battleship in Minecraft? It's easier to good at it. There's a hidden game. USS North Dakota, you actually sail that ship and blast other fleets. And it's a top ship in the game, and over 250,000 people are playing it every day at the same time. You can't download it on your computer and just sit there and play it on your computer. You play worldwide against other people.
So that's why a pop culture thing, I call it.
This is a postcard they sell at the Heritage Center. There must have been hundreds of them done over the years of the life in ship. We're to a model. It's all stocked. I don't think they make it anymore. There's about a 1/350 scale. It's pretty good size, so the model would be about this long. The one I have on the cable is called Kit Bashing. I took a Japanese battleship, similar design, and I kind of repainted it and moved stuff around. I did try to get General Del Palmer in the Veterans Park in the to buy one to have in a secure display case in the visitor center. It cost $3,000, and it's not 100% museum quality, authentic model. Takes about a year to build. So, but I got a motion. I didn't give a second. So we ended up with the B-52, and I'm glad that you had the B-52 and Lenore to the area died and said someone. Here's our present day North Dakota, a Virginia-class nuclear attack submarine. So it's been on the water and sailing around the world since 2014. It's unique in a way. All the missiles are up here. It has 2 rotating cylinders, 6 cruise missiles that shoot out vertically, and they're almost like a revolving chamber, like in pistol, that they shoot out the front. And I think that's it, so what's the questions? But I might be able to answer.
You were talking about earlier, they had welding them, they put the.
Yeah, 1906, 1907.
How did they seal that?
They were hot ridded it, but every one of those joints had a grid behind it, vertically and across. I tried to research a little better. Did they heat the seams and, hammer them together, like hydraulic jackhammer and stuff like that? They use alky compound of some kind.
It is.
The wood welding, arc welding was just being invented. So I thought, of course, by the time the ship was crafted, there was lots of arc welding and stuff like that. And the first all-metal welded ship was built around the 1830s. So, yeah, it surprised me too. I thought, well, the Titanic was built the same way. It was all the ships of this era will work on. They had to roll out drifts. And so. Yes, Burke.
Then that's Washington 3, and they started, blah, blah, blah. What were they like done, vendor battleships?
Well, I suppose it was almost obsolete by that time already. Usually 10, 15 years.
This is barrier all the way out, so you don't.
Yeah. 10 to 15 years on the average ship's life, because if they would have, well, the other thing too is the Washington Treaty also canceled I had was here 5 ships that were being started, or the times have been drawn and the money have been appropriated, so we could have had quite a few more ships. When we ended World War II, 6 battleships, super battleships, were canceled. And 2 of them were 30% done in shipyard. The United States built, counting the USS Maine and the Texas, the sister ship, built 73 battleships. Or hired them or had drawn enough or had money for them. And all half of them were scrapped. But there's a bunch that were sunk as storied ships. Or as reefs, comes in nowadays is completely opposite as a reef. There's about one of our battleships is it's called storied, is a reef for fish, coral, and everything like that. It's very we don't scrap ships anymore. I hope you've read stories about what's happening in Bangladesh and other areas where they take the giant tankers, they wait for high tide and they ram them on the shores and they cut them apart on the land under the worst conditions, the most toxins, the most dangerous job almost. Photographer that had some photos at the Art Museum years ago. Should have fantastic images. There's been a National Geographic too. Towering chunks of metal 10 stories tall of these ships being cut apart. Almost like you were seeing a kind of Days movie or something like that. Destruction, So, and it's that's a very hard thing to do these days because there's so much asbestos to move, towers and things. The USS United States, the passenger liner, has just been completely cleaned and stripped and been towed up to sea to be sunk as a reef. Big effort to try and save that ship, but it didn't outer and got it so long ago that there's nothing that I deserve. So the first museum ship that I knew of was the Battleship number 3, the Oregon. And after World War I, it was donated to Oregon. It was important as a museum ship. I guess they looked great in the pictures I saw. Well, World War II started. They took it back. They got it, they took everything off, and they filled it with ammunition, and they towed it into Pearl Harbor. So they ruined out the entire. They really didn't have to do that. It would have been our oldest battleship. Now the oldest battleship we have is the Texas, which was a Houston Ship Channel, and I spent a day on that years ago. It's on Yellowstone, and it's been totally refitted to dry dock and everything. So this is a book published by the USS Texas Foundation. It was also saved by school kids donating knives, nickels, and pins. So that's probably by the foundation. I brought this book. This is my father did a fair picture. This was actually not by the ship's printing shop. So he was able to bring us back, and we made that to the war, 46 or so. Yeah. They heard the story on the Mercurial 100-year anniversary. So there's a couple of pictures that are also in my presentation, and it talks about it. And a column by another author about the relatives, why we have that. There are many battleship books out there. It's a good, cheap, easy read. It's just a history of American battleships. So, busy ship on page. That kind of helps. When I first started doing this, finding that the model in Bismarck of looking at things, the first book I found was in 1991 in Gordridge Library. And then it wasn't till 99 I found something on there. And then it exploded. The internet exploded into everybody started recording information on about battleships and everything else to me. And that's where we do all the research now. So, Naval Source is a big website. NavalHistory.com is another one. The official Navy archives and things like that. You can find cool things. I didn't bring them. The closest ship we have to the North Dakota, this is an expanded drawing of the dreadnought, the the ship and maybe everything else, made everything else all sweet. But that one, the USS Olympia was also in the East Coast by the New Yearly. It was closed that day, but it's probably our oldest one, and I'm afraid it's going to sink because we can't raise the money to fix it all. It's in a river, but it's all live corrosion. So, and this is if you find a boat like this, the white cover with the big seal on the front is the official U.S. Navy issue board. And so that breaks out. Maybe like gas. And there is a coffee cup with an orchilla. And if you're on your way out, you can buy a Mrs. Manfork's coffee cup. Or there's a few of that from the shelf. That was in World War II. It was a small Coast Guard type cutlery that patrolled the West Coast. So, questions, criticisms. I hope everybody could hear okay, and
Excellent.
I hope I did okay for my second time ever doing this.